Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. She came to her wedding with quadruplets, Millionaire stunned. Jonathan Reed was a man the envy of all. At 38, he embodied the very image of American success, elegant, strategic, and visionary. In just over a decade, he had built an international technology empire, with headquarters in San Francisco, Tokyo, London, and Berlin. His company, Reed Innovation Group, had revolutionized online communication and artificial intelligence applied to health. But beyond the numbers and magazine articles, it was his quiet, almost magnetic confidence that fascinated. With a calm, measured voice, he knew how to convince investors and journalists. His steely gray eyes and haughty bearing gave him the air of a diplomat, while his discreet smile suggested a man who had it all, and who knew how to live up to it. At society dinners, women looked at him with discreet admiration, and men, even the most powerful, sought his recognition. That day, on that mild May morning, Manhattan was waking up to a golden light. The sky was clear, the trees in Central Park were in bloom, and a light breeze made the leaves dance along the quiet avenues of the Upper East Side. Jonathan was about to marry Emily Collins, the woman he believed had managed to touch what even success could not, his heart. She was the image of natural elegance. With her long, light brown hair, honey-colored eyes, and a soft, sincere voice, Emily had won not only Jonathan, but also the esteem of the most discerning circles of New York high society. She came from an influential Massachusetts family, the daughter of a former senator and a respected Harvard law professor. But Emily refused to settle for her inheritance. She founded her own foundation at 26, working to educate inner-city girls. Her commitment and discretion had won over even the most cynical. Together, she and Jonathan were the perfect match: beauty, brains, influence, and heart. Their wedding took place at Plaza Hotel, in the grand gilded salon, whose crystal chandeliers shone like constellations falling from the sky. Dozens of decorators had transformed the room into a veritable hanging garden, arches of peonies, cascades of white lilies, rose petals falling gently onto the tables like blessed rain. The subtle scent of the flowers mingled with the piano notes played by a musician straight from Vienna. The guests had arrived at noon, wearing floor-length silk gowns, perfectly tailored tuxedos, antique brooches, and rare diamonds. Senators, financial magnates, and renowned artists all wanted to witness this union. Cameras' flashes popped outside. White-gloved waiters circulated with trays of appetizers and vintage champagne. The music, a delicate blend of jazz and classical, floated in the air like magic. In an anteroom, Jonathan adjusted his midnight blue silk tie in front of an antique mirror. His best friend, Daniel Weston, gave him a friendly pat on the shoulder. "Do you realize that you're going to get married in front of over 400 people? And that persona doubt that this is the union of the century?" Jonathan gave a smile. "I have conquered the world. Now I want to build a kingdom with her." Everything seemed perfect. Too perfect, perhaps. Because no one on that day suspected that behind this impeccable facade, an unexpected event would disrupt the course of the day. An event that would call into question the established order. An arrival that would shake the very foundations of this modern fairy tale. As the wedding procession prepared to march down the aisle, a faint shudder ran through the crowd. At first, it was just a murmur, a mere background noise. Then heads began to turn, conversations abruptly stopped, and faces froze, some in surprise, others in a sort of almost embarrassed disbelief. The back door of the room had just opened with calculated slowness, like something out of a movie. And there stood a woman with an air of simplicity and poise. Erect and confident, dressed in a perfectly tailored ivory suit, she radiated an elegance that didn't seek to shine, but that captured everyone's attention. Her brown hair was pulled back in a loose bun, revealing a face of calm beauty, marked by strength rather than seduction. Her eyes, dark and attentive, swept the room with an almost intimidating serenity. Her name was Vanessa Harper. Beside him walked 4 men, identical, yet distinct. Quadruplets. All in dark, tailored suits, each sporting a subtle detail that marked their individuality, a royal blue pocket square for one, a vintage watch for the other, a gold boutonniere, a discreet ring. The contrast between their physical unity and their strong personalities created an image as striking as it was intriguing. The silence that fell over the room was almost palpable. Vanessa Harper, a brilliant and fiercely independent entrepreneur, was a well-known figure in the discreet circles of fair trade and sustainable fashion. She disliked the spotlight or cocktail parties. Yet her name circulated in the most exclusive circles. She had turned down a $50 million acquisition from a textile giant, preferring to keep control of her company. She advocated ethical luxury, and elegance that made sense. And today, there she stood, like a quiet storm at the heart of this perfectly orchestrated ceremony. But what was most striking was not his success. It was his past connection with Emily Collins, the future bride. Emily and Vanessa had known each other as children, at a private school in New England where everything seemed destined for well-born girls. They had grown up together like two opposing stars, Emily, radiant, adored, followed by all eyes. Vanessa, more discreet, more reserved, had had to assert herself from the shadows. A gentle, then increasingly bitter, rivalry had slowly created a distance between them. They had lost touch after a disagreement that no one had truly understood, a wound buried beneath the years. And here Vanessa appeared at her wedding, not alone, but surrounded by her 4 brothers, whose fame was beginning to make waves in business circles. Ethan, Elijah, Emery et Evan Harper. They were young, brilliant, and feared in business circles. Together, they had founded a diversified family holding company, which was quickly climbing the rankings of the country's most influential companies. They operated as a block, bound by a rare brotherly instinct, capable of negotiating silently with a mere glance. Jonathan, who had been perfectly calm until then, felt an icy current run up his spine. He knew the Harpers by name. He'd even read an article describing them as the 4 horsemen of responsible capitalism. But he never imagined he'd see them here. And above all, she. The sight of Vanessa, moving between the rows of seats with the same grace as a head of state entering a world summit, deeply disturbed Jonathan. It wasn't fear, or even jealousy. It was something else. A dizziness. A tension. A premonition that something fundamental had just shifted in the invisible foundations of this day. Emily, standing behind the silk curtain that still separated her from the altar, caught a glimpse of the scene through a crack in the curtains. Her breath caught in her throat. Vanessa? Here. She hadn't seen her in 7 years. Their last conversation had ended in the cold, by a lake, with harsh words and silences worse than slaps. She'd never heard from her. Not even a message, a call, a card. Why now? And why with them? This unexpected return was not insignificant. It was not an impulsive appearance. It was a message. Vanessa hadn't come to steal the show. She had come to remind people that she existed. That she was neither a ghost from the past nor a forgotten old friend. She was a force. A presence. A woman standing tall, carried by years of silence and construction. And Jonathan, watching from the altar, wondered if this wedding, so well planned, so perfect on paper, could survive such a shockwave. The ceremony hadn't even begun yet, and yet something had already changed. After the ceremony, as the applause faded into the hall's golden echo, guests migrated to the reception. A grandiose space beneath a glass roof illuminated by hanging garlands, like a starry sky recreated in the heart of Manhattan. Champagne glasses clinked, waiters moved gracefully, and conversations floated in the air fragrant with jasmine and orchids. Jonathan Reed, always impeccable in his black tuxedo with satin lapels, stood aside for a moment near a small decorative pool with shimmering reflections. He had just experienced one of the most symbolic moments of his life, but he still couldn't quite come to terms with it. There was a slight wavering within him, a dull sensation that some unforeseen event had shifted something at the very center of equilibrium. It was at this moment that Vanessa approached. She walked calmly, without theatrics, but with that quiet dignity found in those who have nothing left to prove. She stopped a step away from him. Jonathan looked up, meeting her gaze. "I'm happy for Emily," she said simply, her voice low and controlled. There was no sarcasm, no tension. Just the truth spoken with sincerity. Jonathan nodded slightly. He sensed this conversation was not trivial. "But there are things you should know," she added, almost in a whisper. Intrigued but open, he discreetly invited her to sit with him on one of the stone benches that lined the pool. The murmur of the small fountain drowned out their voices, isolating them from the rest of the reception. Vanessa took a breath. Then she began to unravel the threads of their past, calmly and frankly. She told him about New Haven, the city where they had grown up. Summers spent running in the fields behind the private school where their mothers taught. Shared notebooks, promises scribbled in notebooks, laughter that made their voices ache. She described their adolescence as a luminous mix of complicity and silent rivalry, both brilliant but different. Vanessa, rebellious, creative. Emily, studious, radiant. Then she told him about the rift. The misunderstanding. A misinterpreted letter, a manipulative teacher, and a silence that had fallen. Instead of talking about it, Emily had cut him off. It wasn't a cry, it was an absence. The kind of breakup that leaves invisible scars. Jonathan listened without interrupting. Each of Vanessa's words opened a new window onto the woman he thought he knew inside and out. Then she touched on Emily's lonely years. Years even he had never suspected. The sudden death of her mother during her freshman year of college. A father who had become a ghost of himself. Emily had withdrawn into silence, holding on to keep from breaking down. She had mourned alone, all while maintaining her studies, her social commitments, her perfect image. She never wanted to worry anyone, Vanessa murmured. She always believed that showing her pain was a betrayal of the strength expected of her. Jonathan gently squeezed his glass of champagne between his fingers. The weight of this truth hit him hard. He remembered saying to her a few months earlier, "What I love about you is that you're always so serene." He understood now that this serenity was a kind of armor. Vanessa continued. "All this time, my brothers and I, we watched. From afar. We knew where she was. What she was going through. We discreetly removed certain obstacles so she could keep moving forward. Without her knowing that it wasn't destiny, but us." She looked up at Jonathan. "I'm not telling you all this to give myself a role. Or to make you doubt her. On the contrary. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the truth about the exceptional woman you chose. She never complained. Never broke down. But she survived much more than we imagine." A dense silence fell between them. Jonathan was deeply moved. He understood that this marriage was not simply a union between two people, but also a meeting point between the past and the future, between buried pain and new bonds to be forged. He turned to Vanessa, his gaze softer, more genuine. "Thank you. For what you did. For her. And for me." Then, after a pause. "Join us. You and your brothers. This marriage isn't just a beginning for the two of us. Perhaps it's also an opportunity to build something new, together. Without misunderstandings. Without silence." Vanessa looked surprised. But a discreet, sincere smile stretched her lips. "So let's make peace. And do better." As they stood up together, the room turned toward them. Emily, who was talking with a cousin, met Vanessa's gaze from a distance. They stared at each other for a long time. Then, in a simple but symbolic gesture, Emily stepped forward, letting the distance fall away. First it was a look. Then a smile. Then a step, too. Finally, the two women found themselves in the center of the room. A brief moment of hesitation. Then a long, deep, silent pause. Cuddly, under the expectant gaze of the guests. A murmur of emotion ran through the room. Some applauded softly. Others held back tears. Jonathan, standing near them, felt deeply shaken. Usually, he was in control. He anticipated, calculated, and dominated situations. But tonight, he had been surprised, touched, and moved. And for that, he was grateful. This, he thought, was what love and maturity demanded, not absolute control, but opening. The humility to listen. The strength to recognize what others had endured in silence. And as the music gently resumed, and laughter and smiles mingled in the air once more, the evening continued, not as a social celebration, but as act of reconciliation, a rare, almost sacred moment between souls bound together, finally ready to meet again. A few months later, in a modern auditorium in the heart of Soho, an event brought together a diverse crowd: journalists, investors, young designers, community members, and influential figures from the business world. The atmosphere was both elegant and electric. A large banner hung above the stage bearing the name of the newly launched project. New Roots Initiative, Cultivating the Future of Women Leaders. Alongside Jonathan Reed and Emily Collins stood Vanessa Harper and her 4 brothers, Ethan, Emery, Evan, and Elijah. All smiling, supportive, united not by blood alone, but by a shared vision, to create a comprehensive support structure for young women from disadvantaged backgrounds who dreamed of entrepreneurship, but who often lacked the networks, funding, training, or confidence. The project combined Reed Innovation Group's financial resources, Emily's social expertise, Vanessa's entrepreneurial experience in ethical fashion, and the quadruples' strategic genius in management, logistics, and impactful growth. Together, they envisioned an innovative system: mentorship, scholarships, incubators in several states, and even a patient capital investment fund dedicated exclusively to women founders. That evening, the focus wasn't on them, but on the program's first beneficiaries. Young women took turns on stage, recounting their dreams, their obstacles, and their rebirth thanks to the support they received. Some had created natural cosmetics brands, others food cooperatives, or local tech companies focused on the common good. In the room, the emotion was palpable. Jonathan, standing next to Emily, watched the scene with quiet pride. He remembered that day in May, when Vanessa had entered the wedding hall like a powerful enigma, disrupting the lines, awakening buried memories. That day, something had cracked inside him, and it was a good thing. He had begun to see beyond the glossy veneer of his perfect life. He understood that the greatest wealth was not to be found in actions or acquisitions. It was to be found in true relationships. In the courage to reopen old wounds in order to heal. In the humility to build not alone, but ensemble, even with those we thought were forever distant. He turned to Emily, who was listening with emotion as a young Haitian entrepreneur recounted how she had started a community recycling company in the Bronx. She held Vanessa's hand discreetly. There was no longer any tension between them. Only that shy tenderness that resurfaces between two people who have weathered the storm and chosen forgiveness. Behind them, the Harper quadruples kept watch, still as coordinated as ever, but more open. More anchored in a mission beyond their control. At the end of the event, when everyone stood to applaud, Jonathan felt a thrill run through him. Not pride. Not superficial satisfaction. But a deep joy, a new clarity. That evening, as he left the stage after a brief speech, he placed a hand on Ethan Harper's shoulder. "I never thought I'd be part of such an unlikely family." Ethan smiled, half amused, half serious. "The best families are the ones you choose and build. Not the ones you inherit." Jonathan nodded. Yes, he thought. For that day, he had learned that the true legacy one leaves behind is not measured in fortunes passed down, but in lives transformed. And that sometimes, an unexpected arrival at a wedding can give rise to a future we could never have imagined.